I love a nerdy, trivial pursuit. Can any of you relate to that? I mean, it's Friday night, we're gathered around PowerPoint. I think it's fair to say, right? So for me right now, it's languages, learning a bunch of languages. But a few years ago, it was countries, learning to identify them all on a map, knowing the capitals, matching the flags. Not just countries, but colonies, disputed territories. Many of them have their own capital and their own flags. These aren't particularly interesting. These are the British overseas territories. But the one in the upper right really caught my eye. That's a very distinct feature there, those waves, and that's the flag of the British Indian Ocean Territory. When I got to the capitals, I was a little uneasy. So this is a colony in the middle of the Indian Ocean, one of the most remote places on Earth. And its capital was Camp Justice. Something's fishy about that, right? That sounds like buying a used car from Honest Pete. Kermit gave me that one. So a quick Google search confirmed my suspicions that Camp Justice is not a place of justice. So tonight, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this place, these people, and their story. The British Indian Ocean Territory is composed of the Chagos Archipelago, a string of coral atolls that have been populated by the Chagossian people since the 1700s. They descend from African, Indian, and Malay people. The first population were brought there as enslaved people to start a coconut plantation. Over a couple of hundred years, they formed a distinct culture with their own Creole language, culinary practices, and practices around dance, music, and drumming. Speaking of life there in the 1950s and 60s, one woman recounts that living in Chagos was like being a part of one big family. Everyone shared everything. Whatever we cooked, we shared. If there was any need for help, there was always someone available. Another woman said, every Saturday we gathered for Saga. Everyone danced together. It was a great life, is what she said. The thing about Chagos is that it's not just in the middle of nowhere, it is equidistant from everywhere. And in the Cold War context, that became a very valuable idea to the United States, who entered into a secret deal with the United Kingdom to set up a base on one of these islands, Diego Garcia. The deal was, we'll set up this base, we'll lease it for 50 years, it's now extended another 20 years, and you do the dirty work of clearing the people, and we'll give you a big discount on nuclear weapons. Now there's some history here, right? Because in the 40s, the United States cleared some Pacific atolls of their indigenous populations in order to test these weapons. And now they're using the weapons as a currency to pay someone else to do the same dirty work here on the Chagos Archipelago. So they did it. They cleared the people, they built the base, 2 very long runways where they could land, heavy bombers, fuel tankers. It was even a backup landing space for the space shuttle program. They set up this base to counteract Soviet influence in the region, but it became an important staging ground for US military operations in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan in particular. So the UK had to do their part. They had to get the people out of the way, right? This was diabolical. The first thing they did was on all their official documents to start referring to the Chagossian people as contracted laborers on these plantations, to establish that there's not a permanent population, not a settlement, not an indigenous community, but just contracted laborers. The second piece is that Chagos was part of Mauritius, the colony of Mauritius. And during this time, it was an interesting time where 17 British colonies were gaining their independence, including Mauritius. But Britain split Chagos off into its own new colony, the British Indian Ocean Territory. So that was the last colony that Britain created, and today it's their only African colony. So having established this framework of bullshit, they self-justified their own actions that would follow. So in order to start to get the people off Diego Garcia and out of the archipelago altogether, they prevented people from returning if they left. So if you went to visit family, if you had to seek medical care off the archipelago, you were blocked from returning. And they didn't tell you in advance. You just couldn't go back. Like, imagine going to Florida for the weekend with $20 and then you have to stay in Florida forever. So for people still living on Diego Garcia, where the base was going to be established, initially they were permitted to go to some of the other atolls, habitable atolls, 100 to 150 miles north. But ultimately, everyone had to go. So the British encouraged people to leave voluntarily by cutting back on the ships of food and supplies and eventually stopping them altogether. They punctuated that encouragement in one horrific incident, rounding up all the dogs, putting them in a building, and gassing them. And this is an event that Chagossian people who were children at the time remember vividly over 50 years later. All 2,000 Chagossian people were moved from all the islands, including the ones where there was no military base hundreds of miles away, to Mauritius and Seychelles, where they endured decades of abject poverty, where they suffered cruel discrimination. But they didn't accept that as their fate. They've fought in every court that would hear their case. They've talked to every media outlet that will hear them. They've had successes, they've had setbacks, but still they cannot return to their homeland. They've been fighting for over 50 years. The base is still there. They actually changed the name. It's not Camp Justice anymore. It's now Thunder Cove. And they had a contest. Somebody won a backpack and some gift certificates for renaming it. So they had a ceremony, they had a barbecue, and they played volleyball on those beautiful sandy beaches that belonged to these people. In the 2000s, living in exile, in diaspora, the Chagossian people created a new flag to represent their homeland. And the black bar in the center represents their strength and their struggle. This flag was not in the deck that I studied. I don't remember all the flags that I studied, but this is one that I vow to remember.